The champagne flute slipped from my hand, crashing to the marble floor as Isabella's words echoed in my ears. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with," she said with that sweet, yet insincere smile, her hand brushing my shoulder as if I were nothing more than an afterthought. The room fell silent over 200 guests, now staring at me. The 55-year-old woman in the modest navy dress. That's when Thomas's face went pale, his eyes locked on mine, the recognition dawning in his gaze. And just like that, everything changed. I should have been prepared for something like this. In all the years I had lived in the shadows of my own success, hiding behind modest clothing, a simple lifestyle, and quiet investments, I had expected that my privacy would remain just that private. But Isabella, with her perfectly manicured smile and her sharp, calculating eyes, had managed to unravel everything with a single sentence. And then, of course, Thomas Mitchell, her father, the man I'd quietly saved from financial ruin, had recognized me. It all started years ago, long before my son Ethan ever met Isabella. My late husband, Jack Carter, was a brilliant engineer, one of the quiet innovators who never sought fame. Together, we built something solid. We started with small, simple technology patents, things that most people wouldn't give a second glance to. But Jack's ideas were gold mines in disguise. The first patent sale in 2011 made us comfortable. The sale of the second one a year later? That set the foundation for everything we built. I remember the day the deal was finalized, as though it was yesterday. Ethan had just graduated from college, a bright-eyed, idealistic young man with a degree in marketing. He was eager to start building his career, believing the world would reward his hard work, as it should. Jack and I, however, knew we had just struck a financial windfall, a $20 million deal. But instead of telling Ethan the truth, we told him it was a much smaller amount. A few million, just enough to be comfortable. The rest, we invested. Conservative stocks at first, real estate in emerging neighborhoods, and tech startups that showed potential. Jack had a gift for recognizing opportunity in the unlikeliest places. By the time Jack passed away in 2018, our portfolio had grown beyond anything we could have ever imagined. We were sitting on close to $800 million. $800 million. Yet, Ethan still believed that we were simply living off some decent but unremarkable investments. It wasn't until after Jack's death, when I made the decision to buy into Mitchell Holdings, that things began to change. Things I had never imagined would happen, and certainly not at the hands of my son's new wife. The Mitchell family estate sprawled across acres of beautiful California countryside, complete with rolling hills and perfectly manicured gardens. It had an air of grandeur about it, the kind of wealth that was visible in every corner. I had never been one to chase that kind of life. I didn't need the lavish home, the designer clothes, or the flashy cars. All I needed was the security of my investments and the privacy to maintain the life Jack and I had built. Ethan had always been a good son, and he was happy for me when I made the decision to invest in Mitchell Holdings after Jack's death. He knew that I had a quiet hand in many successful business ventures, but he never suspected the extent of it. To him, I was simply his mother, who had lived modestly, always out of the spotlight. It wasn't until that fateful day at the wedding that the truth came rushing to the surface. The ceremony itself was magnificent, as expected. Isabella glided down the aisle in a dress that could probably buy a small house. Ethan stood at the altar with that proud smile, his heart full of happiness. I watched him, my heart swelling with pride and a tinge of sadness. Jack wasn't here to witness this moment, but I was. I was proud of the man Ethan had become: successful, kind, and hardworking. But I also knew that this wedding wasn't just about love. For Isabella, it was another step in securing her place in a world of wealth and privilege. I had spent weeks preparing for the wedding, choosing a modest navy blue dress from a reputable department store paired with my grandmother's pearls. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention. I wanted to blend in, to remain the quiet woman I had always been. But from the moment we arrived at the Mitchell family estate, I felt the eyes of the world on me. Patricia Mitchell, Isabella's mother, eyed me as if I were an intruder, something that didn't quite belong in her picture-perfect world. I let it slide, telling myself it was just her way of sizing me up. But when Isabella approached me during the reception with her parents in tow, I felt the tension in the air. "Mom and Dad," Isabella had said with that sickeningly sweet tone, her hand placed lightly on my shoulder. "I want you to meet Ethan's mother." That was when she said it, the words that would change everything. This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with. The words cut through the chatter and the clinking of glasses like a knife. The entire room froze. Over 200 guests, all staring at me, waiting for a reaction. I could feel my heart race, my hands trembling. But just as quickly, I felt something else: recognition. Thomas Mitchell's champagne flute faltered, his gaze locking with mine, his face draining of color. He whispered, "Margaret Carter?" I felt my stomach lurch. Margaret? That wasn't even my name anymore. My full name was Elaine Carter. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, and I knew exactly what was happening. Thomas Mitchell, a man who had nearly lost everything just a few years ago, was now remembering a meeting we had a few years back. The meeting had been a routine business acquisition session, or so he thought. He didn't know it at the time, but the corporate investor who had saved Mitchell Holdings from a financial collapse wasn't a faceless company, it was me. I had quietly bought up his failing company using a shell company, one of many I had established to protect my identity. He had thought nothing of the silent investor, just a shadow at the back of the boardroom while the negotiations took place. But now, standing at this wedding, he realized the woman in front of him wasn't just some quiet widow. She was the one who had saved his company, and now she was family. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. Thomas's face was a mixture of shock and confusion as he looked at me, trying to process what he was seeing. Isabella, however, looked at us both, her smug expression shifting to one of bewilderment. She didn't understand the weight of the moment. She didn't realize that I wasn't just some obscure widow sitting quietly in the back of the room. I was the one who had been quietly pulling the strings of the family business all along. I had always kept my wealth under wraps, carefully managing it so that no one would ever realize the extent of my success. It was a strategy I had perfected over the years, maintaining discretion while steadily building an empire. But now, with a simple revelation, my carefully constructed life was about to unravel. I didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried my best to keep a calm face, to play the role of the polite, invisible mother of the groom. But inside, my thoughts were swirling. I was aware of every glance, every whisper, every person who glanced in my direction. It was as if the entire wedding reception had shifted into slow motion, with everyone now fully aware of the truth they had no right to know. As the night went on, I could feel the weight of Thomas Mitchell's gaze on me. He didn't speak directly to me after the initial shock, but I could tell from the way he lingered near me, the way his eyes narrowed as he analyzed my every move, that he was thinking about the meeting that had happened years ago. The same meeting where I had quietly stepped in, under the radar, and saved his company. But it wasn't just about the company. It wasn't just about Mitchell Holdings. It was about the years I had spent building my life and my wealth quietly, never once thinking that one day I would have to defend it, never thinking that my carefully orchestrated discretion would be exposed to the very people I had tried to shield it from. And then there was Isabella. Her words still echoed in my mind, each syllable laced with venom. Family embarrassment. I had never thought of myself as the kind of person who would be publicly humiliated. Not in front of so many people, but there it was. The moment when everything I had worked so hard to protect was shattered in an instant. It wasn't just her words that hurt, it was the implications behind them. Isabella's calculation was clear. She had no respect for me, no understanding of the life I had led. To her, I was a means to an end, nothing more. I had always kept my wealth hidden, not because I was ashamed, but because I understood something that most people didn't. The world doesn't know how to handle wealth that isn't flashy. People expected diamond rings, luxury cars, and yachts. They expected an extravagant lifestyle to match the numbers. But that's not how I operated. I didn't need the validation of others. What I had built, I built with quiet intention and patience. It wasn't about appearances, it was about stability, security, and protecting my family. But Isabella and her family had no idea of the patience and strategy it took to create something like what I had. They were only focused on how they could get their hands on it. The moment that Thomas had recognized me, everything changed, not just for me, but for my entire family. Ethan had been so wrapped up in the excitement of the wedding, so eager to start his new life, that he hadn't seen the cracks in the foundation of his own marriage. But now, after the words that had been spoken, I could see the doubt in his eyes, the unease in his posture. Ethan had always trusted me, and I had always made sure to shield him from the darker aspects of my life. But tonight, everything had come to light. His new wife, Isabella, had just shown her true colors, and I wasn't sure if Ethan was ready to see it. The next morning, the phone rang at 7 o'clock sharp. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the events of the night over and over again. It was Ethan. He sounded frantic, and I knew immediately that he had heard the rumors. "Mom," he began, his voice tight with emotion. "What happened last night? I don't understand. Dad's company? What do you mean you were the one who saved it?" I could hear the confusion in his voice, the way his words trembled with disbelief. Ethan had always prided himself on earning everything through hard work, on doing things the right way. He wasn't like the Mitchells, who were born into wealth and privilege. Ethan had always believed in the American dream, the idea that if you worked hard enough, you could achieve anything. And up until that moment, he had no reason to believe anything different. But now, with this sudden revelation, the world he had built for himself was starting to collapse. "Ethan, sit down," I said gently, trying to calm him. "I need to explain something. There's a lot I haven't told you, but it's time you knew the truth." "Mom, please," he cut me off, his voice rising in frustration. "What is all of this? You're talking about Mitchell Holdings like you've been secretly running it all these years. How could you keep something like that from me?" I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I had dreaded for so long. "I didn't want to tell you, Ethan. I didn't want you to be burdened with this. I didn't want you to feel like you were living off of my money. I wanted you to succeed on your own, to build your own career, without feeling like you had a safety net under you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "So, all those years, when you said we were just comfortable, when you told me everything was fine, you were lying to me?" "No," I replied softly. "I wasn't lying, but I wasn't telling you the full story either. Ethan, everything I did was to protect you, to protect our family. I didn't want anyone to know the extent of our wealth because I knew what would happen if they did." Ethan was silent for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, are you telling me that Isabella's family, that Mitchell family, has been living off of your money for the last few years?" I felt a pang in my chest. "Yes, I've been quietly supporting them through Mitchell Holdings. When I acquired the company, it wasn't just because I wanted to. It was because I saw potential. I saved it from going under, and I kept it running. Thomas didn't know that I was the one behind it. He didn't know that I was the investor who bought out his failing company. But now he does. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to explain all of this?" Ethan asked, hurt in his voice. "I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything," I said, my voice cracking. "I wanted you to build your own life, Ethan. not one tied to my money. I didn't want that for you. I thought if I kept everything hidden, you could have your own path, your own success." Ethan sighed heavily. "Mom, you should have told me. You should have trusted me to make my own decisions about this." "I know," I said quietly. "But now things have changed. We need to figure out what to do next. There's more at stake now than just our family's privacy. I need you to be strong, Ethan. Because things with Isabella, with her family, are about to get complicated." The silence between us was heavy, and I could tell that Ethan was struggling to process everything I had just told him. But the truth had come out, and there was no going back. The following days were a blur of tense phone calls, unanswered questions, and a growing sense of unease that lingered like a storm cloud hanging over everything. Ethan had taken the news harder than I expected. I had thought he would understand, that he would see why I had kept everything hidden, but instead, it felt like I had shattered the foundation of everything he believed about our family. I had spent the last 15 years making sure he felt proud of what he had earned on his own. And now, in a single conversation, it felt like all of that had been undermined. I hadn't seen Thomas Mitchell since the wedding, but I knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. I had spent years building up Mitchell Holdings, keeping it out of the public eye, managing it from behind the scenes, and keeping a low profile. But that quiet life was no longer sustainable. After Isabella's outburst and Thomas's recognition, my carefully constructed privacy was exposed, and the ramifications of that revelation were just beginning to unfold. Isabella had been quiet since the wedding, but I knew better than to think that she would let this go. I could practically feel her calculating her next move. She was a woman who knew how to get what she wanted, and I had just unwittingly handed her a golden opportunity. The first sign that things were about to get more complicated came when my phone buzzed early one morning. I recognized the number immediately, Samantha's lawyer. Marcus Webb had reached out to me, his voice polite but cold. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we would like to schedule a meeting to discuss some of the matters that were raised at the wedding. There are some financial details that need to be addressed." I paused for a moment, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew what this was about. Isabella had started digging. She had already shown her true colors, but now she was taking it a step further. She wasn't just interested in my family's wealth. She was trying to find a way to lay claim to it. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied cautiously, though I already knew the answer. "Miss Anderson," Marcus continued, "is concerned about some discrepancies in your financial activities, particularly regarding the purchase of Mitchell Holdings and your relationship with the company. She believes there is more to the story than you've let on." Oh. The words hung in the air like a threat, a clear indication that Isabella had started her investigation, digging into every detail of my finances, looking for something, anything that she could use to leverage against me. She knew about the shell companies, the discrete investments, and the buyout of Mitchell Holdings. But I also knew that the Mitchells, despite their wealth, had been living on borrowed time. Their finances were a mess, and Isabella's family had been relying on me for support, even if they didn't realize it. Now, it seemed that Isabella was trying to turn the tables on me. "We'll see you tomorrow morning at 10, Marcus said, cutting through my thoughts. "It's best if we settle this quietly. This is about family." The word family felt like a punch in the stomach. I had tried to maintain the facade of a quiet, humble widow for so long, but now everything had come to the surface. I had no idea where Isabella's ambition would lead her, but I could already feel the storm brewing. And I knew one thing for sure. I would not let her destroy everything Jack and I had worked for. Not without a fight. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting, poring over every financial document I had ever created, every investment I had made. I wanted to make sure I had everything in order before I met with Marcus and Isabella's lawyer. I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative to suit their needs. They had no idea what they were getting into. When I arrived at the office the next morning, I was met by Marcus Webb and two associates. Isabella wasn't there. but I could feel her presence looming over the room. Marcus greeted me with a tight smile, his handshake firm but cold. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone professional but carrying an edge. "Thank you for meeting with us today. I know things have been complicated recently, but we hope to resolve this matter quickly." I nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Let's get to the point. I'm not interested in playing games. What is it that you're looking for?" Marcus didn't waste any time. "My client, Miss Anderson, believes there may have been some financial misrepresentation regarding Mitchell Holdings. She suspects that you've been involved in a more substantial way than you've let on, and she intends to investigate further unless we can come to a resolution." I leaned back in my chair, trying to mask the anger I felt rising in my chest. "Isabella is looking for leverage," I said coldly, "but I'm not the one she should be worried about." Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly, but he said nothing, waiting for me to elaborate. "I didn't buy Mitchell Holdings out of spite," I continued, my voice steady. "I bought it because it was undervalued. Thomas Mitchell had mismanaged the company, and I saw an opportunity. A good company can withstand a little mismanagement if you know what you're doing. I didn't destroy the Mitchell family. I saved it. I gave them another chance." Marcus glanced at his associates before nodding slowly. "And yet, Miss Anderson feels that she was promised something more than what she received. She believes she is entitled to a greater share of the family fortune, and she is exploring legal avenues to ensure she gets it." I could see where this was headed, and I wasn't about to let Isabella's greed dictate how I lived the rest of my life. "If Isabella wants to claim what she feels she's entitled to," I said, my voice now hard, "she can try. But I won't be bullied into giving up what I've built. Not by her, not by anyone." There was a long silence, and I could see the gears turning in Marcus's head. He knew he was up against something far more complicated than a simple family dispute. I had spent 15 years building my wealth and my privacy, and I wasn't about to let it all fall apart because of Isabella's insatiable ambition. After a moment, Marcus cleared his throat and folded his hands in front of him. "We can settle this amicably," he said, leaning forward. "But we need to find a solution quickly. If this goes public, it could damage both families." I smiled coldly. "Amicably? I don't believe that's possible. Isabella started this war, and now it's time for her to realize she's underestimated me." Marcus didn't respond. He knew I was right. As the meeting came to an end, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Isabella had poked the wrong bear. I wasn't going to let her or her family destroy what I had spent years building. I was going to take control of this situation, and if they thought they could intimidate me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The days following that meeting felt like the calm before a storm. Despite my outward composure, I could feel the pressure building. Isabella and her lawyer, Marcus Webb, had made it clear that they weren't going to back down. They had set their sights on my wealth, and they would do whatever it took to pry it from me. But I had learned a long time ago how to handle people like them, people who thought they could manipulate and control their way through life. What they didn't understand was that I had been playing this game for much longer than they had. By the time the next week rolled around, I had already begun preparing my counterattack. Marcus's insinuations during our last meeting had only fueled my determination to ensure that Isabella and her family would not succeed in their quest to manipulate me. I had nothing to hide, but I wasn't about to let them control the narrative. I spent hours with my financial advisor, James Harrison, combing through every document, every transaction I had ever made, ensuring that everything was in perfect order. I had always kept meticulous records, always double-checking everything to make sure there was no way anyone could accuse me of anything shady. I wanted to be absolutely prepared for whatever came next. While I worked, I could feel the weight of Ethan's silence pressing down on me. After our conversation, he had retreated into himself. He hadn't called, hadn't reached out, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was questioning everything I had ever taught him about money, about success, about life. The conversation we'd had wasn't just a revelation to him, it was a betrayal of the trust I had worked so hard to maintain. He didn't understand the complexity of the situation, the necessity of protecting what Jack and I had built. But I hoped that, in time, he would come to realize that I had done it all for him to ensure that he could have the life I had always dreamed for him, free from the burden of our family's wealth. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk reviewing the last of the documents, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what kind of conversation we were about to have, but I knew I had to face him, to explain things the best way I could, even if it meant admitting that I hadn't always been forthcoming with him. "Mom," Ethan's voice came through the phone, sounding tired. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said, about, about the money and everything else." I sat back in my chair, bracing myself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. "Ethan, No," he cut me off, his tone softer than I had expected. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been so upset. I know you've done what you thought was best for me. I just, I didn't understand why you kept everything from me." "I know," I replied quietly, "and I'm sorry for that. I thought that by keeping things quiet, by letting you build your own life, you wouldn't feel like you were living in my shadow." "You were protecting me," Ethan said, a note of realization in his voice. "But I need to understand it all, Mom. I need to understand why you've been doing things the way you have, why you've kept it all a secret." "I understand," I said, my voice tinged with relief. "But we can't do this over the phone, Ethan. There's too much to explain, too much that's been buried for so long. I need you to meet me. Tomorrow, I'll explain everything, the whole truth." There was a long pause before Ethan finally spoke again. "Okay, I'll be there. Just, just tell me this, Mom. Is everything okay? Is this all about Isabella and her family?" I exhaled slowly. "It's not just about Isabella, sweetheart. It's about everything I've built. And now, everything is at risk." The conversation ended, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. I wasn't sure what to expect when Ethan arrived the next day, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Isabella's ambition ruin everything I had fought so hard to protect. The next afternoon, Ethan arrived at my apartment, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. His usually confident demeanor had been replaced with a look of exhaustion and uncertainty. We sat down in the living room, and I could feel the tension between us. "I don't know where to start, Mom," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. "I never imagined that you were involved in all of this. I thought you were just, well, just Mom. You know?" I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I know, sweetheart. I didn't want you to see me as anything other than your mother. I wanted you to make your own way in the world without feeling like you had to live up to anything that wasn't your own achievement." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "But now everything is out in the open. Isabella, the Mitchells, they're coming after you, aren't they? After everything." I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment I had to lay everything bare. "Yes, they are. But it's not just about them coming after me. It's about me protecting everything I've built, everything that your father and I worked for. They're trying to manipulate the situation, trying to use legal threats to force me into a settlement that will give them access to things they don't deserve. And I won't let that happen." Ethan sat back, absorbing the gravity of what I was saying. "So, Isabella? She's been planning this for a while, hasn't she?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "She has. And she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants. But I'm not going to just roll over and let her take everything." Ethan looked at me for a long moment, and then, to my surprise, he nodded. "I get it now. I understand why you did what you did. I didn't want to see it at first. But I see it now. I felt a surge of relief wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan could see beyond the wealth and the secrecy. Maybe he could understand the bigger picture. But there was still a long road ahead. Isabella wasn't going to back down, and neither was I. "Thank you, Ethan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This isn't easy. And it's not just about us anymore. It's about protecting everything I've worked for, everything your father and I built together." "I'll stand by you, Mom," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I know I don't have all the answers, but I'm not going to let them tear our family apart." The words were simple, but they meant everything to me. I had raised Ethan to value honesty, integrity, and hard work. And now, finally, I could see that he was ready to stand by me, no matter what. As the conversation came to a close, I felt a strange sense of hope. This battle wasn't over, but I wasn't facing it alone, and that gave me more strength than I had ever thought possible. The following weeks were a blur of strategy, meetings, and whispered conversations. Isabella and her lawyer, Marcus Webb, had made their intentions clear. They weren't going to back down. They wanted a piece of what I had worked so hard to build. The Mitchells were a family of privilege, accustomed to getting what they wanted, and they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to protect my family and my wealth. I had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility. I lived modestly, dressed simply, and always kept my personal life private. But what Isabella and her family didn't know was that, beneath my quiet exterior, I had been building something far larger than they could ever comprehend. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, influence, and the ability to navigate a world that didn't understand how the game was played. The first real indication that Isabella wasn't just making idle threats came one afternoon when I received a letter from Marcus Webb's office. It was formal, cold, and made my blood run cold. "Dear Mrs. Carter, as per our previous discussions, it is clear that the current financial situation requires a more formal agreement. My client, Miss Isabella Anderson, believes it is only fair that she is entitled to a share of the wealth that you have accumulated over the years, given the fact that her father's company was saved through your actions. We would appreciate your cooperation in this matter to avoid further escalation." I could almost hear Marcus's voice as I read the words, each one dripping with calculated menace. They were playing hardball now. They were trying to push me into a corner, hoping I would cave into their demands. But what they didn't realize was that I had spent 15 years planning for a situation like this. I was prepared. The next day, I called my lawyer, Thomas Hale, a man who had been with me through countless business dealings. I trusted him, and I knew he would help me navigate this. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, and then gave me the advice I had been expecting. "It's time to stop being polite, Elaine. This is a fight. You need to protect yourself, and you need to do it now." I knew he was right. There was no room for diplomacy anymore. Isabella had made her move, and now it was my turn. The first thing I did was contact my financial advisor, James Harrison, who had been managing my portfolio for years. I needed to ensure that everything was airtight, that there were no weaknesses in my financial structure that Isabella could exploit. After all, her goal wasn't just to claim a portion of my wealth, it was to get control of it. I knew she would stop at nothing to find a way in, and I couldn't afford to leave any gaps. As James reviewed the financials, we discovered something surprising. Isabella had been more than just curious about my financial situation. She had been systematically trying to build a case against me. James had tracked down a series of transactions that suggested she was in contact with a private investigator, someone who had been trying to trace the ownership of my shell companies. She wasn't just looking for money. She was looking for a way to destroy my reputation, to discredit me in front of everyone who mattered. It was a strategic move, one designed to break me down before going public with it. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let her use my privacy against me. "James," I said, after a long silence, I need you to get me everything, every single detail. I want a full report. I want to know everything about her investigation. We're not going to let her play this game with me." "Understood," he replied, his tone resolute. "I'll get on it right away. But Elaine, you need to know if she's going after you this hard, it's only going to escalate from here." I could feel the weight of his words settling over me. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore, it was a war. And if Isabella thought she could win, she was about to find out that she had picked the wrong opponent. The next few days were spent preparing. I didn't just want to defend myself, I wanted to take control of the situation. I had built this life on careful planning, strategic investments, and absolute discretion. It was time to show Isabella and her family that they had no idea who they were dealing with. The first step was to call a meeting with Ethan. He had been quiet for too long, and I needed him to understand exactly what was at stake. I needed him to be ready for what was coming. Because this wasn't just about me anymore, it was about our family's future. When he arrived at my apartment that afternoon, he looked at me with a mixture of concern and determination. "Mom," he said, sitting down across from me, "I've been thinking about everything, and I know you're not going to let them get away with this. But what's the plan? What do we do next?" I looked at him carefully, weighing my words. "Ethan, you need to understand that this isn't just about money. This is about everything I've built, everything your father and I have worked for. I know you've always wanted to make your own way, but you need to know that the stakes are higher now than they've ever been. This isn't just a business deal, it's a fight for our future. For your future." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of my words. "I understand, Mom. I'm with you. I've always been proud of the way you've built everything quietly, but now I see the bigger picture. I see why you had to keep it all hidden." "Exactly," I said. "And now we need to make sure that Isabella doesn't destroy it. We have to be strategic about this. She's already started building a case, trying to expose me in public, and I won't let that happen. We need to take control of this situation." Ethan looked me square in the eyes, his expression firm. "What do we need to do?" "We go on the offensive," I replied. "I'm not just going to sit back and let her tear us apart. I'm going to expose the truth before she can use it against me. I'm going to show her that I'm not afraid to fight back. And once she sees that, she'll know she's not dealing with some naive widow. I've built an empire, Ethan, and I'm not going to let her or anyone else take it from me." That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing my strategy, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. Isabella had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated me. And now, it was my turn to make her realize just how wrong she was. As the days passed, I gathered my resources, prepared my legal defense, and laid the groundwork for what was to come. Isabella had no idea what kind of fight she was about to walk into, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I was ready. The weeks dragged on with mounting tension. Isabella's family was no longer just testing the waters, they were pushing hard, trying to get me to back down. But the more they tried, the more determined I became to make them understand that they had underestimated me. I wasn't the meek, invisible woman they thought they could walk all over. I had spent years building a financial empire, not just for my own benefit, but for the future of my son. And if Isabella thought she could waltz in and claim it, she had another thing coming. The final straw came when I received a letter from Marcus Webb's office, officially requesting that I attend a mediation session. They wanted to resolve the matter amicably, or so they claimed, but I knew better. This was their attempt to force me into a corner, to get me to admit something they could use against me. They weren't interested in resolving the situation. They were interested in gaining control. I called my lawyer, Thomas Hale, immediately. "Elaine," he said, after reviewing the letter, "this is their way of trying to pressure you. They want you to give in, to settle without a fight. But you've made it clear that you're not going to let them have the upper hand." "I'm not," I replied firmly. I've been through too much to let them dictate my terms now. But we need to handle this carefully. They're playing a game, and I'm not going to let them win. Good, Thomas said. I've been in touch with your financial team, and we're ready for this. We have all the documentation we need to back up your position, but remember, this is going to get ugly. Isabella and her family are not going to give up easily. I'm counting on that, I said, a sharp edge to my voice. Because neither am I. The day of the mediation arrived, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. I was sitting at the large conference table in a sleek, modern office building in downtown Los Angeles. The room was filled with lawyers, financial advisors, and the ever-present figure of Marcus Webb, who greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Carter, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for joining us today. We hope this can be resolved without unnecessary conflict. I shook his hand, my grip firm. I'm here to discuss the matter at hand, Marcus. Nothing more. Of course, he said smoothly, before turning to his client Isabella, who sat across the room with her arms crossed, her face the picture of controlled smugness. I could tell she was already plotting her next move. Isabella wasn't here for a peaceful resolution. She was here because she thought she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. She thought I would cave, but I had no intention of letting that happen. I sat down, meeting Isabella's gaze with a cool, calm stare. Let's get to the point. What exactly do you think you're entitled to, Isabella? She smiled sweetly, though I could see the impatience behind her eyes. I think, Mrs. Carter, that my family is entitled to the wealth you've been quietly managing for years. Mitchell Holdings was my father's company, and you acquired it without any transparency. I believe that you owe my family a fair share of what you've gained from it. Her words were laced with venom, each one calculated to push my buttons, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me riled up. You're mistaken, I replied, my voice steady. I didn't acquire Mitchell Holdings to steal from anyone. I acquired it because it was undervalued, because it had potential, and because I saw an opportunity to turn it around. The fact that your father didn't see that and nearly lost everything because of it doesn't change the truth of the matter. I didn't do this out of malice, and I certainly didn't do it to enrich myself at anyone's expense. What I did was save a company that was on the brink of collapse. Isabella's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Marcus, however, spoke up. Mrs. Carter, I think it's clear that we're not going to get anywhere unless we come to a more structured agreement. We've reviewed your financials, and we believe that there is more at stake here than just Mitchell Holdings. The fact that you've been involved in other investments, including several shell companies, raises questions about the nature of your wealth. We believe it's time for full disclosure. Full disclosure? I repeated, incredulous. You're asking for access to my private financial records because you want to pick apart my life? Let me make one thing clear. Everything I've done has been legal and above board. I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation for my personal investments. You're not entitled to any more than what I've already given you. Isabella leaned forward, her gaze sharp and calculating. I think you'll find, Mrs. Carter, that once the full extent of your holdings comes to light, there might be more than just your wealth at risk. If you don't comply, we're prepared to take legal action. We will expose everything. The threat hung in the air, like a blade ready to fall. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought I would back down. But I had been through much worse in my life. I wasn't going to let Isabella or anyone else take what was rightfully mine. I met her gaze with unwavering confidence. If you want to expose everything, Isabella, then go ahead. But you'll find that I'm not the easy target you think I am. If you go public with this, you're not just going to ruin me. You're going to ruin your own family, too. The room went silent. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Isabella's expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Are you threatening me? She asked, her voice barely concealing her anger. I leaned forward, My eyes locked on hers. No, Isabella, I'm giving you a choice. You can keep playing this game, and I'll expose every detail of your family's financial situation, including the fact that they've been living off of borrowed money for years. Or you can accept the fact that Mitchell Holdings was my decision, and you've had the opportunity to benefit from it. But make no mistake, I'm not going to let you tear my family apart. Isabella's face drained of color, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't used to someone fighting back. She wasn't used to someone who had the power to expose everything she had worked so hard to hide. I'm done with this, she said, her voice tight. We'll take our chances in court. Fine by me, I said, standing up. I'll see you there. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of relief. The battle wasn't over, but I had made it clear that I wasn't afraid. And Isabella? She was about to learn that when you mess with the wrong person, the consequences can be much worse than you ever expected. The days that followed the mediation were quieter than I expected. I'd expected chaos, retaliation, and frantic calls from Marcus Webb or Isabella. But instead, there was only silence. They had underestimated me, and I had given them a taste of what would happen if they pushed me too far. Ethan and I talked more in the days that followed. He seemed to be processing everything with a calmness that surprised me. I had expected him to be angry or confused, but instead, he was focused. He knew now that everything I had done, every decision I had made, had been with the intention of protecting him, of ensuring that he could live a life free from the shadows of our wealth. He had made his peace with the situation, and we were moving forward together, stronger than ever. As for Isabella and her family, I knew that their next move would come soon enough, but I was ready. I had fought too hard for everything I had to let it be taken away by greed and manipulation. The fight had become more than just about wealth. It was about integrity, about standing up for what was mine, and protecting the family I had worked so hard to build. The truth had been laid bare, and now it was their turn to deal with the consequences. I had given them the choice to walk away, but it seemed that they hadn't taken it. Now, I was prepared for whatever came next, but I was no longer afraid. In the end, this wasn't just about money or power. It was about what we value and how far we're willing to go to protect it. Our wealth, our success, and our privacy are not just things to be guarded. They are pieces of the puzzle that make up who we are. We build our lives with care, with intention, and with purpose. And when those things are threatened, we must stand strong. I've spent 15 years quietly building my legacy, and I'm proud of what I've created. But the true measure of success is not in the money or the assets we accumulate. It's in the strength we find when we are tested. It's in the relationships we protect, the values we hold dear, and the knowledge that we can face anything life throws at us, no matter how dark or difficult it may seem. To everyone who has ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood, remember this: your worth is not defined by how others see you, but by how you choose to stand in the face of adversity. Stand tall, stand proud, and never let anyone take away what you've built. Thank you for listening and for sharing in this journey with me. If you're enjoying these stories, please subscribe and stay with me as we explore more journeys of strength, resilience, and the fight for what's rightfully ours. Your voice matters, and together, we can all share in the power of a life well lived.